the early leavers. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Jomo Stewart. We're here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. It is Tuesday, February 9th, 2021. Our guest today is Mayor Ward, here to present, give us a bit of a pre-look at an ordinance that is up for consideration before the Fairbanks North Star Borough Assembly on Thursday regarding a new tax credit for energy efficient new builds. So Mayor Ward, if you'd like to have the floor, you may. Oh, but you may be on mute, sir.
All right, I've got too many screens up, so I'm holding my space bar. If I drop it because I can't find my mute button, forgive me. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. I hope you can see my screen. Can I get a thumbs up from someone?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. All right, this is the presentation that I gave to the Finance Committee last week, and so I'll be sharing it with you today with a little bit more information in regards to the valuation and how it works, the credit itself. So this is Ordinance 2021-03. It's the ordinance that would institute an energy efficient tax credit.
Sorry, sir, but you've gone to your home screen.
All right, let me take myself off mute and then share my screen. All right, I apologize. Okay, how's that? Can you see my screen now and hear me?
We hear you, but we're actually still looking at you. At least I am.
And that's no good. All right. How about that? Is that better?
There we go. Yes, sir. It says introduction.
There's a reason why they don't let me behind the controls on these things. So, okay. All right. So in 2000, the legislature passed House Bill 232, which allowed municipalities to create a local energy efficiency tax credit program. It was pretty broad in its interpretation. We're taking a narrower view in the application of our ordinance, and I've got some explanation to kind of explain what we're doing here.
Now, if I may give a shout out at this moment, I believe it was actually Rep. Hopkins who carried that bill. Is that correct?
It was, and he's joined us in the audience today. So thank you, Representative.
Indeed, happy to help the borough out, and thanks Jomo and Hardenbrook was my staff who carried it and did an excellent job. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Definitely excited to see what opportunities this may avail our community. The actual statute language that was put in is 2945-049, Energy Efficient Construction Tax Credit. What it says is that a municipality may by ordinance provide for a single or multiple year energy efficiency construction tax credit to offset a portion of the property taxes due on real property improvements made during the immediately preceding tax year before the municipality's initial approval of the tax credit, including energy efficient new construction, refurbishments, remodels, and renovations. The municipality shall establish eligibility criteria for the credit in the ordinance adopted under this section. And that's what I'll show you we're proposing to the Assembly here next. So the purpose of the ordinance, ordinance is to promote and encourage construction of the highest level of residential energy efficiency that we have a standard for in order to improve the quality of life of our residents, lower the cost to heat our homes, and reduce the environmental impact to our community by consuming less energy per square foot of building space. Improvement of the quality of our housing stock is also being is also implied to be a higher value and longer life for the structures in our community. What does the ordinance do? The ordinance provides for up to a $7,500 tax credit for newly constructed residential structures for 1 year after construction. The eligibility for this credit is that the construction must have been completed in the prior year. The complete application and necessary documentation to verify the rating of a 6-star standard by the HFC ACWARM program must have been completed by April 1st of the year after construction. And then taxes for the current year must be paid prior to credit being issued. And I'll give a little bit of explanation for that here in just a moment. So the statute was approved through the legislature as a credit, not an exemption, which was a little bit of a, I guess there was a little bit of a nuance there. When we look at a credit versus an exemption, for example, is like your homeowner exemption. It's taken a direct value reduction off the property, and there's no taxable occurrence or anything associated with that. With a credit, it's actually a taxable occurrence. And so if we are to issue a credit, we have to apply that to the beneficiary of the credit. And so that has tied a little bit of our hands in how this is applied, but I still think it works. And actually, I think it works quite well. Not as robust as an exemption, but it does provide some additional, I think, controls for the community to control how many of the exemptions are given and then what the actual impact to the tax base is. So the tax credit, as we propose the ordinance, is limited to the total area-wide taxes attributed to the improvements of the value of the new structure. If you remember back to the language in the statute, it says that the improvement value is what is used to determine the credit. And so this is one of the reasons why we've chosen to go with a new construction method versus a retrofit or remodel, is it's very difficult for our assessors to be able to attribute a specific value to an improvement. For instance, with new construction, we can clearly say there was nothing there the year before, and now there's a building that's worth X, Y, or Z. With a retrofit, if you were to add insulation to your attic or put in new windows or a new boiler, our assessors do not necessarily give you additional value for the improvements for those types of things. Many of them are considered maintenance or other type of just general upkeep of a building. So there may be possibilities there, but under our current structure, we don't have a very good way of saying that there's a specific improvement value associated with any one of those retrofits or renovations. What we clearly do with new construction. The other thing is that the credit has to be tied to the improvement value. So for instance, if we were not able to determine an improvement value for a property, it would be very difficult for us to attribute any credit for that improvement being done. For instance, with the new construction, if a building was built and let's say the improvement value or the value of the structure was $300,000, we would clearly be able to say that the improvement value is $300,000 would be attributed to the taxes paid or the taxes to be paid in that year. This also is tied to an appropriation by the assembly. Being a credit, it's actually a check that we write to the beneficiary of the credit. And so the assembly has to appropriate that money. And the way that we've structured our ordinance is that it's a pro rata determination. If there's more credit, if there's more folks that have applied for the credit, then we actually have funding for. So that is another nuance to the ordinance and to the statute that we wanted to make to recognize. We've also limited ours to 1 year. So for the credit, it's a 1-year credit. You would be issued that credit. Essentially, it is a check that we would write to you from the borough to the homeowner or to the beneficiary for that credit. To give an example of how this would work within our current year structure, if the assembly were to approve this ordinance on Thursday, any construction completed by December 31st of last year would be eligible. They would be able to apply for the credit if they have an energy rating completed with paperwork filed to the borough by April 1st of this year. They would have to pay their taxes for this year by the last business day of November 2021 for the second half. And then we would issue a credit sometime after December 1st of this year to the beneficiary. One of the things that we looked at with the credit is most people we're assuming are going to have a mortgage on their property. And so with the tax credit, the way that this is structured is it doesn't affect what you're paying for your mortgage. Many mortgages require that you take out your taxes as part of your monthly payments. And so your amount that would be calculated when you take on your loan, when you assume the loan for the property, would not change by the credit. You would essentially get just that cash back through the form of a check from the borough sometime after December 1st. And we've established that timeline of December 1st because we first have to make sure that we've received all the applications. We would know what those are after April 1st. We would have to then know that everyone had paid their taxes. That's the next qualifier for the eligibility. And then once we've determined that, we would take the total amount of money that had been appropriated by the assembly, divided it by the amount of folks that had their credit issued, so long as it's not above the amount that we've appropriated. So if that happens, as I mentioned, then it would be the pro rata. So you might not receive the full benefit of the area-wide taxes paid. It may be a portion of that, again, depending on what the assembly approves. Our proposal, the ordinance is going through right now. There is no fiscal note with it. That is presumed to be a part of the upcoming budget for the FY 21-22 year. So the amount that we're going to be requesting, that the administration is going to request the assembly set aside for the ordinance, is $150,000. And we use this number based on prior year numbers looking at class of construction. We don't calculate the energy efficiency or look at that as part of the appraisal, but we do give classification for construction quality. And so we're assuming that most properties that are of a 6-star standard are going to be of the 600 class quality construction, which is that's the highest quality that our assessors attribute to a property. As I mentioned earlier, we're using the 6-star energy standard as certified by an eligible rater using the BEES standard, the Building Efficiency Standard for Alaska. This is the HFC standard is the other way. So if you've ever done an energy home rating, this is the standard that most of those raters are using for your property. I will also add that this is for residential structures. And so if you do have a multifamily unit development and you can certify each one of those properties, each one of those would be eligible for the credit up to the $7,500 for the property.
Say that again, sir.
So if you have a multifamily residential development, this ordinance is developed for residential structures. So long as you can get a energy rating on that property and it's of the 6-star standard, then each one of those buildings would be eligible up to the $7,500 for the total property.
Oh, so per building, not per unit.
Correct.
If they're all connected.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
The other thing that I wanted to mention is this is tied directly to the area-wide property tax assessment. So your service districts are not impacted. The non-area-wide fund, the solid waste collection district fund are not impacted by this. And so what that means is our current year budget mill rate for the area-wide mill rate is 13.892 mills, which would mean that you essentially would be eligible for up to $1,389 per $100,000 of value with the credit. What that means is that up to so if you had a building, let's say you built a new house and that house is worth $540,000 roughly, then you essentially would have all of your area-wide taxes covered under the credit. So you would be able to that's the total value amount that you would need in order to be eligible for the total $700 or $7,500 credit. If you had a property worth less than that, or your improvement was less than that $539,000 or $540,000, then you would receive a portion out of the $7,500 based on the amount of taxes that you have paid, the area-wide taxes you've paid. And that's what I have for my presentation. I'd be happy to go over questions on the ordinance and how this will be applied.
Well, just scanning the participant list, we have some fairly knowledgeable folks online. Near the top of my participant list is Dave Messier. We also have Clark Mill. I would just invite anyone who has any questions to go ahead and take themselves off mute and fire away.
Hey, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Jomo. Mayor Ward, thanks so much for the presentation. Can I ask that last comment you had made about the availability of the tax credit? So are you saying that if your property value is lower, let's say it's, 260,000 or so, you would get that tax credit spread over 2 years, or you're limited to the tax credit you could take with just that 1 year?
Good question. So it's based on the area-wide taxes paid for 1 year. So you would be eligible for less. So if you had let's just use simple numbers, a $200,000 property, then your total credit that you would be eligible for would be roughly $2,800. And the reason for that is because the way that the statute is written is that it has to be tied to the improvement value of the property. So we did look at essentially just issuing a blank credit. If we were to say if you do any 6-star standard, we could issue you a $7,500 credit, regardless of the property, of the improvement value. But unfortunately, the way that the statute is written, we have to tie it back to the improvement value. So that may be something that I know we've had conversations with the representative about, that potentially could be considered in the future. For the way that it's structured right now, that's what we have.
Got it. Thank you, Mayor Ward.
Okay, we have info insights. Off mute, do you have a question? And I can't see from this whom you might actually be.
Oh, this is Jamie. I'm just joining.
Okay. So I did the quick math. Well, I guess let's start with this. It seems like really the purpose, if we had to give a defined purpose for this, it's to encourage better and higher quality building construction.
Yeah, if I could, Jomo. So this was actually one of the borough's priorities last year, and we very much appreciate Representative Hopkins picking it up and running with this. And I can speak to some of the intent, at least I think I had when we brought this forward, was that we wanted something that was similar to the rebate program for new construction that HFC was providing a number of years ago. Where if you built a 5-star plus or a 6-star standard home, you would be eligible for the beneficiary, the owner of the property would be eligible for a credit. And they had $7,500 and $10,000 as the credit eligible for those properties that met that standard. When HFC's financing went away for that program, there was definitely, I think, an impact to the market. Contractors were certainly taking advantage of that program and marketing it, improving the quality of their construction, the quality of the efficiency of their homes that they were building. And so the idea was to create a program that a local community could take on that was similar to that, to improve that higher level of construction, because there's so much benefit to our community from an environmental perspective, from an efficiencies perspective, from an economic perspective. And so that was really the intent, was to do something to promote and to encourage that higher level construction. I think it's maybe a little bit questionable if, for a $300,000 home, if a few $1,000s is enough to encourage a contractor to go from a 5-star plus construction standard to a 6-star. There's other benefits that come along with that. As I mentioned, the benefit to the resident, the benefit to the community. And so our hope is that this is a first step in what we can do to begin to bring back the emphasis on higher quality construction. At least that's my hope in this to the market, and give some sort of an incentive for doing that.
Okay. I also did the quick math. You said you think an initial appropriation of $150,000 to essentially fill the kitty. So the quick back math on maximum exposure, that would give 20 houses.
At the full $7,500. So when we did the numbers, we looked at how many houses were built this last year. We looked at the quality of that construction. I think it was roughly about a third of them were of the higher class construction of that 600 class, which would be somewhere around 50 or 60 homes. Of all of those, not all of them would necessarily be eligible, and not all of them would be eligible at the full amount. So I think it's kind of our best guess of what would be a good start, and then we'll see where the market goes from there. The hope is that as we come up on this next season, that it will be a little bit more of an incentive for contractors to look at stepping up their notch, stepping up their game to that 6-star standard from this 5-star plus that they are hopefully already building.
And again,
Hey, Jomo.
Yes, please, Rep. Hopkins.
Thanks. Thanks, Mayor. How many do you think were built as 6-star homes? Talking to the Interior Alaska Builders Association, they said there's not a lot of 6-star homes, maybe more 5+. Do you have any feel for that?
Yeah, so again, we look at the class of the construction. And so I would say most of those 600 class quality construction homes are going to be at least a 5-star plus. How many of them are 6-star, we don't necessarily know. You know, I know there's a few builders out there that build of that higher quality construction. I don't think they do anything else. And so of those folks, they're only doing, you know, you could probably count them on your hands and toes. How many are building exclusively the 6-star quality construction? So again, the hope is, you know, we definitely want to reflect the work that's being done, but we want to encourage more people to build to that higher standard. So my guess is it's probably less than 20 at this point right now a year that are being built.
And then thanks for that. It's got $150 price tag theoretically, although obviously that's going to be capped out. Is there one of the intents of the legislation when we put it through was also to help air quality improvements as well. And there was a lot of effort around solarized Fairbanks and solarized Goldstream, a lot of people putting in solar panels on their homes. I think pretty much all of those cost more than $7,500, and was wondering how it would look to include those improvements for their energy infrastructure in their home as a tax credit. Would be able to be amended onto this legislation if somebody on the assembly wanted to include that, or would it have to be an entirely new ordinance as well?
Good question. So as the ordinance is written right now, it does not include that section in our exemptions component. So it would have to be, I would say it would be better. Anything's possible. I guess we start there. So the assembly could amend the title. They could amend the scope of the ordinance. That would kick it through a whole nother public process, get it referred back to committee. I think a better option would be to propose a new ordinance. The air quality tax credit is one thing that we are looking at. We wanted to get this program up and running for the next construction season, and then get it on the books for this upcoming budget. It is definitely something that we're looking at. I will say that when we've looked at the air quality tax credit, we've been looking at more of the higher impact to the PM 2.5 issue. So looking at oil-fired devices, looking at wood stove devices and how we can exchange those for higher efficiency. But you know, solar, any form of renewable energy that takes you know, fossil fuels or other types of combustion devices off of the airshed is definitely a good thing.
Are you keeping an eye out for federal money that would come through to assist with making a tax credit for those homes to switch over to natural gas downtown to improve that air quality? I don't know if they're going to be necessarily just, you know, green energy funds or something like that, but I assume you're looking at that and have that ordinance ready to roll, or make sure you can dovetail with that money well, because that's what I hear is the number one issue is the conversion cost for IGU.
So we did a little bit off topic, but I think still related to the topic at hand here with Energy for Alaska. The Assembly did appropriate $1 million for conversion programs for oil to gas in last year's budget, which was extremely well received. We did a couple hundred devices, switched them over from oil to gas in the market, and it was very well received. IGU has talked to, at least to my office, about doing additional appropriations. As you know, with the fiscal environment we're in right now, it's very difficult for us to do cash type incentives for those types of programs. We're certainly looking at other options, opportunities to partner with federal agencies to be able to provide those resources. The borough was a beneficiary of the last task grant. We received almost $10 million for the wood stove exchange program, which has been wildly successful, which is going to help us really put a dent in that issue there for air quality purposes. So that is limited to just wood stove device exchanges, but I think we've done the proof of concept with the oil to gas conversion program that gives us a little bit more of a leg to stand on when we go talk to other agencies.
Music.
This is Mike Music. Mayor Ward, following up on Representative Hopkins' comments regarding solar, I was involved with the Solarized Fairbanks as a coordinator for Solarized Esther. And the Solarized Fairbanks, I think, probably was responsible for helping about 75 residents getting solar on their homes. I have two questions on that. One is, does that increase the taxes on their property? And also, can you see a future where we can deduct the installation costs through the borough? And I think this latter part's actually been answered. Also, another question is, there are a group of us looking at forming a community solar project in the Esther area. And at the present time, we're looking at raw land. What are the tax implications on a solar farm?
Great question. So as I understand the statute right now, if you have improvements like renewable energy, solar devices, wind devices on your home, I do not believe that those are taxable. So there should not be an improvement value, but I want to make sure I check on that. That's my understanding of the statute right now. That is for your personal use. Your question about commercial use is that that would, under our current statute, become taxable. So if you were to have any type of large-scale renewable development that is selling power back into the grid, that would be essentially considered any other type of business and would be subject to taxes. We do have another priority that the Borough Assembly has approved that's gone forward to the legislature to address that issue in the form of a PILT. But as I understand the current situation, it would become a taxable occurrence. The only other caveat to that would be if it was for a nonprofit, charitable, or religious purpose, you may be eligible for that exemption. But there's some nuances to there that I probably better not dabble into.
Okay, thank you. We're also looking at putting solar on the roof of the Esther Volunteer Fire Department. Would that fall under the nonprofit?
I believe so. So if it was for the purposes of the department to reduce the cost of energy there, the fire department is a nonprofit very clearly, and they're not taxed as it is right now. So there wouldn't be any improvement value tax to that.
Thank you.
Miss Lisa, I saw for a moment that you pulled yourself off mute.
Yeah, I've been trying to jump in. Yeah, and I have just to bring it back, and thank you, Mayor Ward, for bringing this ordinance forward. As one who lives in an already existing home and actually got in on the energy rebate program in 2015, just before it died. I think that many more could benefit from it. So this is a question that perhaps you can answer, perhaps not, but maybe better for either Joe or Grier to answer. But speaking to the legislation and how this could potentially then extend and cover some of what the energy rebate program used to extend it to retrofits and thinking about how AHFC ran that program, and that there were different steps, so like my home sadly only went up to went from a 4-star to a 4-star plus, and at 20 below zero, even in the hills, I wish it was a 6-star right now. But there were, you did the before test, the after test. There were steps to take to improve to a certain, however many steps you could improve it to. If you started at 2-star, there was a greater chance of improving much more so, because you had a lot more that can be improved upon. And based upon the steps, you would receive a certain amount of, up to a certain amount of money. And, I was eligible for up to $4,000. I didn't spend that much, so I only got back what I actually spent. But it was up to $10,000. And so I wonder if there is a way at some point in the future to extend that. It's more paperwork clearly than looking at a new construction and whether or not it reaches 6 stars. It's more complicated. But it's a 2-part question, whether or not there's the opportunity for that in the future. And you may have already answered it by saying anything's possible. But in the borough, but also if that was part of the intent in the creation of this legislation to try to fill that gap that was left behind with the dissolution of that program.
So I can take a stab at that. The way that the statute is written is that it's tied to improvement value. If it were to say just offer a credit for an improvement done or something along those lines, and I'm not the attorney to know exactly what it needs to say, but I think that there definitely is opportunity to finesse the legislation to include just a blanket credit, so the community could issue a credit for an improvement. So if you were to go from a certain standard to a different standard, and that may be that would certainly be a much better way of determining a credit for a retrofit than what's currently there.
In terms of the legislation itself, it specifically says credit on it, but we left, the goal of the legislation was to leave the maximum flexibility up to municipalities everywhere. We had Alaska Municipal League support for it because it didn't mandate any specific action, and our entire goal was maximum flexibility at the local level to be able to design programs like this. The initial idea came from Mayor Ward, and it was a really good idea that we were happy to carry along, and we worked closely with the borough. There was a communication error somewhere along the lines that the way we had envisioned the legislation working, and I think the way, and Mayor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the way the borough had imagined it working was more of an exemption moving forward in their initial idea for the legislation, and the way that it was described throughout the process. That was missed throughout the many hearings that we had. And so now it's just a credit. So we have to go back and find some way to fix it in order to make it an exemption. In terms of the program you described, Lisa, I think that like I said, it is, the legislation specifically says retrofits, remodels, or new construction. So there are ways to tweak the, or write a future ordinance rather, to make it work. But as it's just the credit right now, the bill is going to be pretty heavy on the borough to have to fund those, essentially make sure that they have the money up front ahead of time, from my understanding, Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong. But I will be continuing to look in a way to fix the miscommunication that happened. Needless to say, it's fairly annoying because it would have been easy to have made it an exemption in the legislation last year when it flew through. So hopefully we can find some place to tweak it and make it work. We have a single subject rule and piece of legislation. So it has to, we have to Christmas tree on language onto another bill that deals with municipal powers or property taxes or building codes or something. And who knows what is going to be moving through the legislature this year in terms of policy. It might just be budget and out. It might be a few big pieces of legislation and out. There's no way of knowing right now. So we'll be continuing to keep an eye open on that. But we gave the borough the maximum flexibility they could, and all municipalities around the state, if they didn't already have this power.
So if I could maybe add to that a little bit, you know, I think that the credit language is probably one of the reasons why it made it through the with such support from the municipal level as well as in the legislature, and Representative Hopkins may be able to speak more to that. But I think it gives, there is some benefit. It's not as easy as an exemption, but I think the benefit to the local community is that it also does give a bit more control on the local level for you to look at the impact to the tax base and not just have a blanket exemption that impacts things like your school education funding and other things. So because of the way that it's issued now, and because we actually have to write the check, it does, I think, give some additional benefit and control to the local level. So again, not exactly like necessarily intended it to be applied. The idea, at least as I kind of envisioned it, was that it would be applied directly to the properties, that, you know, folks just wouldn't have to pay the taxes for that year. But I think us actually requiring the taxes to be paid and then issuing the credit, one of the points that was brought up in our internal conversations when we drafted the ordinance was that most people have mortgages on the property. And so if you had it, for instance, a year where they didn't pay, then they would have a huge amount in their escrow that would then either be, if anyone's ever had, I mean, your taxes go up, right? It happens to everyone. It impacts as your escrow on your mortgage, and then you're either underpaying or you've overpaid. So I think there's still some benefits to the credit program that might not be as negative as it may be perceived at least, or considered initially. The other thing is that the real key here, I think, if there were to be changes to the statute, is the tie to the credit being issued to the improvement value. And so that's where we really have the hang up of like a lower value property being able to issue a full credit. So if the credit was able to be issued based on the improvement, and I think this was Lisa's point, on the improvement to the efficiency standard of the building versus the improvement value of the building, I think that would give additional flexibility to the community to determine how much they issue for what type of improvement. So if you did have, like, let's talk retrofits, again, not part of this ordinance, but it could be, if you were a 4-star standard and you went to a 5-star plus, you may still be eligible for a credit as a 6-star or plus new construction standard. But we just currently don't have that flexibility with the way that it's written right now.
We should talk after this, because I'm confused how the legislation we wrote doesn't allow for all the flexibility outside of the exemption language. So let's follow up.
Yeah, it goes back to the improvement value. We can only issue a credit based on the improvement value. So if there was a very low improvement value given, we can only issue the credit for whatever that improvement was.
So it has to do with the fact that it says credit, not exemption, and the way that the legislation, right?
It has to do with the word improvement. So it has, because if you look at the statute, it says that the municipality may by ordinance provide for a single or multi-year energy efficiency construction tax credit to offset a portion of the property taxes due on real property improvements made during the immediately preceding tax year. So if you didn't have a large improvement value, we can only issue it based on the improvement value, the way that it's written.
I'd rather this not devolve into a negative debate when what is in fact in front of us is what looks to be a good first step using a tool that was provided. But again, that would just be my opinion.
And I will say this has been, I think this is a tremendous step forward, and I very much appreciate Representative Hopkins bringing this through the legislature and championing this. I think this is a great opportunity for us as a community to take a standard and say, to take a position and say that high efficiency standard construction is an important thing for our community. It's an important thing for our economy, and that we want to recognize that and promote it. So there's definitely ways to there's a way to make everything better, but I think we've got a great start here.
Certainly in my experience, there's generally an active debate between how far, how fast you go moving forward on any proposal. And this seems to be, again, a nice initial step on what will be incremental improvement as we go. Certainly it lays that first paving stone. Mr. Dotson, I see you've joined us and you're off mute. Do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, Mayor, the way the ordinance is written now, does that require an energy auditor to participate in the process?
It does. It requires you to have your per 101, per 102 done, very similar to how you would do that for the energy rebate program prior to this program. So you would require your home to be rated, a new home to be rated.
Follow up, Jim?
No, just curious, making sure I understood it.
But again, unlike the retrofit program, where again, it was a 2-gate process because you needed to determine the amount of positive change. Again, starting with a new build construction is just that single energy rating. Correct?
That is correct, yes.
With the only rub being perhaps wanting to get a second opinion if the number didn't come in where you thought it should be.
You should be able to bury that number. Let me just say that.
Okay. All right. I saw for a moment that Mr. Messier had taken himself off mute. Do you have a follow-up, Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Jomo. I did have a follow-up, and Mayor Ward, I think, Jomo, you're an excellent diplomat, and I think you were spot on that this is definitely a step in the right direction. So I'd applaud Mayor Ward and all the assembly members and Representative Hopkins for moving it forward. I guess maybe a clarifying question, and I'm speaking about something which I have no idea about, so you can feel free to talk to me like I'm a child here. But so when the borough issues, a credit, how does that interplay with the tax cap that we've got? And then, is there the ability to move that? Because obviously, the borough's likely in not the most ideal financial situation right now. So that was one part of the question. And then secondly, I guess, so can you just reiterate, are you stating that if the borough goes back, because my understanding right now is that the maximum $7,500 benefit is really only valuable to folks who are building new construction homes that are $520,000. So if that was to change, are you saying that it would need to change at the state statute level or with additional review at the borough level? So sorry to convolute, but those are my two questions.
So it would need to change at the statute level, at the statewide level, to allow us to have greater flexibility there. The other aspect about impact to the tax base, because it is a credit, it does not negatively impact our school funding formula or our tax cap. So because it's essentially, it doesn't do anything to the value of the property, and we have to appropriate the credit. It's considered an expense like anything else, like utilities or payroll or anything else. So it's a budgeted line item. The state does not take a penalty against our funding, education funding. If it was an exemption, this is a nuance that I just learned about, then it would be an impact to our education funding because they penalize us for every bit of an exemption that we give that's not mandatory. So did that answer your question?
It did perfectly. That was a very clear answer. Thank you, Mayor Ward.
And that was an interesting nuance. Again, the difference between forsworn revenue and an active appropriation for a defined program.
And so that was, if I can add, not to talk about the way things could have been, but I think there's a country song on that. But if we were to look at this through the credit eyes, I think still provides a lot of control for the local level. But if we were to divest it from the improvement value and just truly have it like the credit, like the HFC credit, where it was just, if you can meet these standards, then you get this amount. And we still appropriate it just like we do through the credit process. I think it could have more impact to the market for improving the efficiency of the construction and not have the negative side effects of an exemption.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. But we still have a full 15 minutes before the hour. And so I would open it up. Are there any further questions? We also have the presiding officer online. I wasn't sure, Madam Presiding Officer, if you wanted to make any comment, although you'll be voting on this on Thursday. So I'm not trying to put you on a tough spot.
Thanks, Jomo. I'm just here to listen to questions and listen. So thanks.
Okay.
So Jomo, I will add that the Assembly this is up for a public hearing on Thursday, the 11th. And so if folks are interested, they can sign up online through the Borough website for online testimony. The Assembly is also available for email testimony, and that seems to be the preferred method for most folks, at least nowadays. And the easiest way to get a hold of the entire Assembly, which includes me, is to email assembly@fnsb.gov, and that goes out to everyone. So if you were interested in providing testimony, that's probably the best way of doing it.
I will flash this if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor. This was today was my first time really trying to dive in and use the borough's updated site to track down what was on the agenda for this next meeting. And so you will see I'm here on the borough site now. Again, I went through government, assembly schedule, found it on the calendar. I see that there's a Zoom link embedded. Now under that Zoom link, Actually, this is a question for either yourself or Miss Brittany, Miss Smart, or Presiding Officer O'Neill. To give testimony, it's actively proctored. They'll click you on and off a mute. Is this the system you use to actually be able to provide public comment?
Jomo, are you asking if people can testify through the Zoom link?
Yep.
So no, and typically we don't like to do it that way because the added component of a visual complicates things. So we do have occasions where the public will call in and be listening and we can transfer them over, but it is easier and clearer and easier for the clerks to manage when individuals can leave a phone number that we can call and then connect them into the chambers.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That's why I asked. Okay, thank you very much.
It can be done. It's just complicated.
As many things are here in the COVID era. Thank you.
And Jomo, if I could add, it's best to reach out to the clerk's office ahead of time to put your name in for testimony. So if you're interested, to call the clerk's office is probably the easiest way to do that. And you can fill out that information to say, I'm interested in testifying on this ordinance. And then they'll actually call you when testimony is available.
Very good. Thank you. I'm just glad I asked, because I personally was confused at one point. Okay.
Just one last thing. Wanted to say thanks, Mayor, for threading the needle and getting this ordinance going and the initial idea behind the legislation. We'll keep working, and if you guys see other ways we can tweak it on our end, we will certainly be in contact. And please keep an eye out for tweaks we can make as well. Appreciate it. And you're absolutely right, saying we are the gold standard for beautifully built and energy efficient homes is absolutely going to be the right step to go. So we'll stay in touch and looking forward to seeing this pass on Thursday.
All right. And I see Mr. Dotson, you are still off mute. Do you have any questions or any final comments, sir?
Mayor, kind of as a mechanical process, do you see the borough appropriating a pot of money to work off of, or do you see them dealing with this on an individual basis?
So the intent is that there would be a program fund established for the exemption or the credit, excuse me. So that'll be part of our budget process that the Assembly considers here in the next month and a half, 2 months for the upcoming fiscal year. And so the appropriation will be included in there. The idea is that as a program fund, we'll be able to put additional funding into it every year to keep that thing going. So we'll know after this year if we got the number close to being right and what the appropriation needs to be. So for instance, if it was less than, so say we only had $100,000 in credits to issue, that 50,000 would remain in the pot, and we may only choose to put 100,000 in there the next year. But that's going to be up to the Assembly to decide. They have the power of the purse every year to decide how much goes into the pot.
And you had mentioned earlier in your presentation, sir, that you would be proposing, say, $150,000 be used to prime the kitty.
Correct.
Which again, under maximum distribution would, by my quick math, would be essentially 20 homes.
That is correct.
Or 20 structures. Okay. Well, thank you so much, sir. I guess I know I'll be listening in on Thursday. Do we have any final questions here at the very end of the top of the hour? We're moving towards the top of the hour. All right, well, very good. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much. Again, Assembly, Mr. Mayor, again, for your hard work and taking this initial step. Rep. Hopkins, for carrying the legislation and getting it on the books, as well as you, Mr. Hardenbrook. I see you're still here. Just a little forward notice for next week, if anyone is interested. We do have a meeting scheduled. I have confirmed, I have confirmed Mr. Frank Richards from AGDC. We've seen these op-eds in the paper regarding a reconfiguration of the North Slope gas line the governor's new proposal. I also listened to their the AGDC board meeting last Thursday, which is also online if you'd like to check it out. But again, Mr. Richards has agreed to be our guest next week to discuss the Alaska gas line and this new proposal or configuration or move forward path regarding that line. All right. All right. Well, if there's no other business for the good of the order, thank you very much. We'll see you next week. Oh, I guess actually there was one other thing I was going to say. Mr. Richards did caveat his acceptance with the reality that he may get called down to Juneau or called into Juneau to testify on that proposal. And so we may end up having to shift, do a little bump and shuffle on the date or time if necessary to accommodate his schedule vis-a-vis the legislature. But he is confirmed, and so we will be able to get that that one-on-one time with the director of AGDC regarding the gas line. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Again, Mayor Ward, thank you so much. We'll see everybody on Thursday, and we'll see you sometime next week. All right. Have a good week, everybody.